So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at networking hardware. Before we get into that, let's consider some stuff we've already learned about. So what happens when we send a message over a local area network? Now, when we send a message over the local area network, that message first of all has to be split into smaller parts. Those smaller parts will be packaged up into a packet. Each individual part will be a single individual packet. So if I break it down into 5 parts, I'd have 5 packets. A packet will contain the data I want to send, but also the IP address of the destination, where is it going to, and the source, where is it coming from, a bit like a letter. That will then be sent over to a switch, which then might then go to a router, which then goes over the internet, and so on and so forth, until it finds the correct route in order to get to its destination. The packet will be processed, and maybe a response will be sent back through the same mechanisms that we've just gone through. So that's a very high level view of how a packet is sent across the internet. We're now going to start to put a little bit more detail into that explanation. So we can start to look at the actual hardware which is used in order to do that communication. So we're going to be looking at hardware, and as we do so, we're going to be adding a bit more flesh to our explanations of what the local area network is, wide area network is, and also specifically and importantly, what is Wi-Fi? So obviously we're looking at wireless access points, what is a Wi-Fi essentially, and understanding that Wi-Fi does not mean the internet, so really putting flesh into that explanation. Looking at the difference between routers and switches, because a lot of people mix them up really easily, and it is really easy to mix them up as well if you're not familiar with what they're used for. We're going to be looking at the term network interface card, or NICs. Although not something that gets asked about a lot, it is a term that gets used quite a bit, so it's important to understand what it means. And finally, transmission media. So when I do connect devices together using cables, what type of cable is it? Is it copper based or is it optical? So let's kind of recap what we mean by networking. So remember, a network is where we connect multiple computers together so they can communicate. So let's consider the role of the hardware in this scenario, okay, in this diagram. So here I've got my ICT room 1 connecting to a switch. Now we're going to go into a lot of detail on all of these, but essentially switch is used inside a local area network to kind of route packets between computers inside that network. We'll then have a wireless access point. I've called it a Wi-Fi box in the diagram, but it's a wireless access point. And this is where wireless devices such as iPads or phones or things like that, anything that uses Wi-Fi to connect to a network would connect to. Then we have a router, which is then used to connect to a wide area network, or as we have come to understand, the internet. And this is mirrored on the other room. So each piece of hardware has a specific role to play, and we're going to explore those in a bit more detail. We also have a server. Now this is something we're going to go into in later lessons, but think of it this way: a server provides a service of some description. So a file server would provide files. For example, if you've got a shared drive in your school, that will be on a server somewhere. It might be a web server where you have web pages and web files and pictures and all the stuff you see on a website. Those will be then served to anybody who wants them, and so on and so forth. So servers provide some kind of service on a network. So let's start off with network interface cards, because it's dead easy to understand. A network interface card is essentially the device we use to connect to a network. Okay, so it's going to be either wired or wireless. Okay, so we'll have a wired network interface card, and this is where we'll plug in the Ethernet cable if you're going to connect wired, or it might be a wireless internet interface card, or you could call it WIC, I guess, and that will allow us to connect to a Wi-Fi network. Now, modern computers nowadays will have this built into the motherboard, but it is still possible to buy them separately. So for example, you might have a desktop computer which does not have Wi-Fi. You might then buy a separate Wi-Fi card which goes inside the computer, or even a Wi-Fi dongle which you kind of plug on the outside of the computer in order to access Wi-Fi. Okay, so that is what a network interface card is. Now I'll start to come into the more nitty-gritty details. Now, A switch is a device you'll find inside a local area network. Okay, you won't find these in wide area networks because they're not designed for that. They are designed to allow multiple computers to connect to it in order to form a network. Okay, so they're kind of almost at the heart of a collection of computers. So inside a room, inside maybe a school where you've got all your computers, each one would have a cable running from the computer to a switch. Okay, I don't know if you can see it on this diagram, but you can see there's multiple of these. I might use maybe a different color. I'll just circle one. These multiple kind of little connectors, they're known as ports. So every single computer would connect to one of these. So I might have one computer here connected to this port, then this one, another computer connects to this port. So each computer would connect to one port on a switch. Okay. What the switch will then do is allow packets to be communicated around your network. Okay, so a packet would be sent from one PC to the switch, then the switch will send it on to the destination. So it has the job of routing packets. Okay, this word route basically means how do we get it from one place to another. Okay, because it might be that the two computers are connected to the same switch, or it might be that the two computers are on separate parts of the building and connected to different switches. Okay, so there has to be a route which connects them. The last kind of key bit of information about this is that they don't use IP addresses to communicate. They'll use MAC addresses. Okay, so because they are working on what's known as the hardware level, okay, they will do hardware routing. So they will make a note of MAC addresses that are connected to it, and then they'll use those to route packets onwards. So let's have an activity. Okay, pause the video and actually do this first. So draw a diagram showing two computers communicating in a room or cross room. So I've put a little picture at the top here of what I'm kind of talking about. So you don't have to draw all of it. So maybe just draw this bit that I've circled right here. Okay, so just a bunch of computers connected to a single switch. Okay, to keep it simple. Then write some MAC addresses. Now you can make some MAC addresses up. Google them, doesn't matter. Remember, MAC address is made up of 12 hexadecimal values, so it could be AE, FE, 4263 AB. You know, it doesn't matter what they are as long as they look like MAC addresses. So just as long as you remember the format of MAC address, you could just put anyone in there. If you really want to, you can easily look up different MAC addresses on the internet or something like that, but just make them be absolutely fine. Then show that a message is going through a switch. So show a path going from it. So, I mean, please do this in a bit more detail than I'm about to do, but show that a packet is going from one computer to the switch and then to the destination, okay? Because you're showing a route then, okay? Do annotate the diagram, explain what is going on. So explain what's happening as a packet's being constructed, being sent to the switch, and then being routed from the switch using MAC addresses to the destination. Okay. So the next piece of hardware we're going to look at is a wireless access point. Now, if you recall, I said that a lot of people get confused by the idea of what a wireless access point is. Okay, so they think of their Wi-Fi router at home being the Wi-Fi, which is actually not true because it's a combined device. It combines a wireless access point, which gives you access to Wi-Fi and allows you to connect via Wi-Fi to that router, and also the router itself, which allows you to connect to the internet. So it's a combined device. However, in organizations and companies and schools, those devices are split up. Okay, so you will have a wireless access point, which might look like the picture in this slide. Organizations might have multiple wireless access points because a single one of these devices will not have enough coverage to cover a wide area. Okay, so they have very limited range. As I'm sure you know, if you're at home and you go too far away from your router, your Wi-Fi router, then you will lose signal. You won't be able to connect to the network anymore. One thing that's really important is that although you are connecting to this device using Wi-Fi, the device itself needs a cable plugging it into the rest of the network. Okay, it might then connect into a switch. When you're at home and you've got a Wi-Fi router, because it's all one device, that cable is not needed because it's all in one device. There's no need for that cable. But in an organization and a school, those are separate devices, ergo the need for the cable. Okay, so they will be connected via cable to the rest of the network. So here's a really simplified map of the school that I work at. It's certainly the first floor of it. Now, there are multiple wireless access points on this map, and they're shown as green squares. Okay. Now, each of these green squares will have a certain range on it. So, for example, in my room, which is room 111, okay, the range of the Wi-Fi access points, the wireless access point, sorry, kind of takes you roughly around about the stairs. It kind of drops off massively by the time you get to that point. So if I just had that one access point, well, it'd be fine for maybe the other rooms next to mine, but if I was going over to music, for example, I wouldn't get the signal anymore. Or if I was going over to maths on the other side of the route of school, I wouldn't get signal. However, because we've got multiple access points, the access point in the focus room, which is our sin bin, kind of meets the gap. So you can see they will overlap a little bit, which is important because if they didn't overlap, I'll have dead zones. We'll have no access at all, which is not great. But they will kind of overlap and have that signal. So you can imagine I am drawing a line, but actually really it's a circle. It's really hard to draw neat circles using a trackball, I'll be honest. But you can see there's kind of range. And again, this is going to be kind of covered as another big circle. And you can see again, they overlap and so on and so forth. So long and short of it, in a big organization, we'll have multiple access points, and those access points are required to make sure the signal spreads across the entire site. So in your notes now, it's time to make some notes on what a wireless access point is, how to connect to the network, this idea that there's actually a physical cable connecting the wireless access point to the rest of the network. Okay, please do not get confused about devices connected to the wireless access point to how the access point then connects to the rest of the network. Okay, so we are talking about how this wireless access point connects to the network, not how devices connect to it. Okay, so do not say a wireless access points connect to a network using Wi-Fi, because that is not true. What are they used for? Okay, for sending out Wi-Fi signals, allowing devices to connect to it wirelessly. And also, why do we need multiple wireless access points? Okay, why must we spread them across the building if we have a large organization? If you want to go into a bit more detail now, although we will cover this in more detail in another lesson, start having a look at Wi-Fi frequency or channels, okay? And because actually that becomes really important, especially when we've got multiple wireless access points. The next piece of hardware we're going to look at is a router. Now, if you recall, a switch will allow you to connect multiple devices inside the network, and will allow it to route packets to other devices inside that local area network. It will use MAC addresses, okay, so the switch will use MAC addresses in order to work out where packets should go. Routers, on the other hand, will connect local area networks together, okay, and those will then form larger networks known as wide area networks or WANs. Routers use IP addresses and not MAC addresses to route packets, okay, so they will make use of IP addresses, which is very, very different to a switch. So you can think of them in this way, the key differences. A switch uses MAC addresses, a router uses IP addresses. A switch routes packets inside a local area network. A router routes packets over a wide area network. Okay, so we've got those kind of key differences, and that's a nice way to remember them. So I'm going to demonstrate a piece of software called Open Visual Traceroute. This software is free, so if you want to have a go at this at home, you can go onto the website visualtraceroute.net, download the software and give this a go at home. Okay, it is worthwhile having a go at. You can type in different websites and see where they're located in the world. Sometimes they might surprise you. So let's actually see this in action. So here's the software already loaded up, and I've already done a search for guardian.co.uk, the newspaper. Okay, so the search starts off in London. Now, although I don't live in London, actually the offices probably for the ISP that I use are located there, so that's the reasons why. So you will get some weird locations initially. There it's gone all the way up the country over to Manchester, and then it's gone over to Dublin where the servers are obviously held. So if I do another search, so let's say maybe I do a search for YouTube. Now YouTube is obviously owned by Google, so we'd expect this to probably be in America. So let's do a search for it. Again, it's going through this same initial route because it's going through the same servers, and now you can see it's bounced across the world and it's ended up in a place called Mountain View. So if I kind of zoom out a little bit and we can follow the path backwards, so it's gone across North America, across the Atlantic Ocean, and bang, we're back into UK. So that's the connection there. Let's do one final search. So maybe I do a search for BBC. Now, obviously, you probably expect that to be in the UK somewhere. So let's give it a go. So yeah, starts off the UK. Bang. Oh, hang on a second. It's actually located in America. So for those of you who didn't know this, the bbc.co.uk website is actually hosted in America. So there you go, controversial. So if you've not had a chance to look at that software that I've just demonstrated, do have a go at it. It is really interesting. Try different websites out. But essentially, each point on the map will be a router, okay? Because it's routing a packet across the world. It shows which routers it needs to go through in order to send packets from one location to another. However, it doesn't always show the location of every single router. So that's why sometimes you get these really big long lines because some of the routes aren't being shown. That being said, it does give you a general indication of the route it has taken, which is still really interesting. So now's a good opportunity to pause and make some notes. So do make a diagram for a WAN. You can find those on the internet really easily, or you make your own if you wish to. Show that a WAN is a collection of local area networks, that it connects these local area networks together using a router, and explain the role of router in that scenario. So the fact that it routes packets across a wide area network, you may wish to kind of do a visual trace route using that software and take a screenshot and put that into your notes. That would be really excellent notes. And explain the idea that uses IP addresses and not MAC addresses. The last piece of hardware we're going to look at is transmission media. So transmission media is just a posh way of saying the cables we use to connect devices together in a network. Okay. So one of the most common ways of connecting a computer to a network, specifically connecting computers to a switch, is using copper cables or Cat5 cables. Okay, they're also known as twisted pairs because inside them, if you open them up, you'd see a twisted pair of cables. It connects devices to a switch. It also connects switches to routers and so on and so forth, and they're made out of cables. They are ideal because they're cheap, they are fast, however data degrades quite quickly over long distances. So when we're trying to connect maybe two buildings together, copper would be a really bad idea. However, inside a school, they're perfectly adequate to connect devices together. Fiber optic is the other type of transmission cable you need to be aware of, and this time it uses light to transmit data. Data can be sent at very high speeds over much longer distances. It tends to run faster than copper. I have a higher bandwidth, but it tends to mainly be used when we're connecting buildings together. So if we have to transmit data over a much longer distance, we will probably use fiber optics. The last transmission media we've already spent a lot of time talking about is obviously Wi-Fi. This is where we will connect devices wirelessly using radio waves to a wireless access point. We'll go into detail on what all the different technologies behind Wi-Fi are. For now, we just kind of understand the idea. It's a way of connecting to a network. So make a note of those two main wired ones, because we've already spent a bit of time talking about Wi-Fi, and we'll go into a lot more detail later on. So much point doing notes now. Explain what we mean by fiber optic and copper Cat5 cables. Do explain the difference between them, why we use one above the other, and their advantages and disadvantages. So, for example, fiber optic, although it's faster and go over long distances, it's much more expensive than copper. Copper is much cheaper. If you want a bit of a challenge, there is a video which I'll include in the OneNote and the kind of comments for this video. Do watch it. It explains a little bit more about how fiber optic works and this idea of total internal refraction.